So we're going to have a quick chat about how to create equity and how other property investors that we've been working with and all around New Zealand, how people are building and creating equity using leverage and taking advantage of whatever assets they have, and then making sure that they're buying the right assets. So what's the goal here? We want to buy or create future cash flow. That's what the whole point of the property investing, that's what it's all about. We don't want to do all this for no reason. We want to build, $50,000, $100,000, $150,000 of equity every year as a minimum if we're serious about this. And we also want to build cash flow that's going to be passive, that's going to come into our bank account every single week. And so what we're often suggesting for our clients is that we're buying properties that have land bank potential. And so what does this mean? It means that you're buying property that has room for future development. So when you buy a new build property, you'll see that all of the new build properties are usually on smaller sections. There's no real potential for future development. They've filled up the land, they've put a building in the middle of it, and the reason that those sell so well is first-time buyers quite like them with a low deposit, and investors like them. But what you're not getting in a new build is future development potential because they've done the work for you. So let's have a look at a few examples. So one of our clients, Mr. and Mrs. Chen in Hamilton, they bought a 600 square meter property, I think it was like 10, 15 years ago, and it's been bringing in $600 a week for them on average. So not a bad investment, but they really wanted to capitalize. So what they did is they took advantage of a demolish and rebuild strategy, and they actually got the funding sorted. I think it was just over $1 million of funding, and they built 4 properties on this one 600 square meter block. And now instead of $600 a week, it's actually 600 times 4, because these houses are terrace houses. They got brand new amenities. They're perfectly designed for the kind of people that are going to be living in them. And when I first heard about this, I was like, oh my God, like they put 4 properties on one 600 meter block. But you see the drawings and you see how it's all designed, and it's beautiful the way that it's all worked out. I think it might be slightly under 600 a week per property, but it's pretty close. And this property is now it's got 4 properties on it. They've had huge capital gains. I think they're netting 50 grand a year from the property, even with all the interest expense they're paying. So, they took what was in their portfolio and they made it much better. They also, if they have another property, so this is demolish and rebuild strategy. Another strategy that they looked at was building a minor dwelling on one of their properties. So minor dwellings, you can spend 50 to 100 grand, sometimes a little bit more if you'd like. What you're going to do is create another stream of income. So you just want to assess what options your property has and what borrowing power that you have, and do what's best for you. I want to show you another land bank opportunity. So we're seeing properties in that 1,000 square meter bracket, even under 900 square bracket, and what is happening is these properties are getting shifted. So shift the main house and build a whole bunch of terrace houses. Sometimes 5, 6, 7, 8 houses on that one block of land. Sometimes where this property is demolished completely, we're seeing these 1,000 square meter properties have 10 properties built on them, so you really just got to speak with people that are seeing what property investors are doing, and seeing the numbers. And the challenging thing about this is you got to get pre-sales unless to qualify for the funding, banks or lenders are going to want to see pre-sales, and to navigate yourself through that whole journey, you're going to be wanting to work with an expert on that side of things. So what I want to show you is that there are lots of different options when it comes to property investing and building equity and more cash flow. So, land bank, minor dwelling, relocatable homes, subdividing property. We're seeing a lot of people trying to subdivide property themselves, going through the consent process and thinking, oh, I'm going to sell that bit of land. And what the trouble you're running into is, let's say, and this is what we're seeing most often, is you've got around about 750 to 800 of land, and people are trying to subdivide 387 meters squared, and they're trying to sell it. Now the problem with this strategy at the moment is you might spend 150k or thereabouts, up 50 to 100k, but usually closer to 150k in Auckland, doing all the surveying and subdividing, and then you're going to want to sell this section for 400k plus. The challenge is you're trying to sell that land at a big profit, and there's nothing in it for the developer to build. Somebody has to come and build on this land after you sell it and make money. So any developer seeing a high price like that for that little bit of land, or any potential buyer, just doesn't see the point. Any potential buyer is going to want to buy a bit of land they've got the ultimate freedom on, and the back section or the front section of your property is usually not that. So subdivision to sell yourself it needs to be a carefully planned out strategy. But what might be more of a better option for a lot of people is to subdivide and build. So you've got to do the numbers, you've got to find a builder that's going to give you a fixed price contract. But the numbers for subdivision and build, there's a bit of negative press, and there's a lot of people that don't like it, but for most people, the mum and dad investors, it's going to be a better investment if you do the build yourself. Now, the ultimate way to create quick equity is to have a look at your portfolio and assess what renovation potential these properties have. 10, 20 grand of renovations with the right renovation specialists can actually create 50 to 100 grand of extra equity, and that's going to strengthen your borrowing power. So, take a look at your current equity position, and why not borrow another 50 grand to do renovations, even if it's only going to cost you 2 or 3 grand in interest expense annually, and it might add 50 to 100 grand in equity, and you can borrow against that equity. Landscaping is one major factor in how a valuer looks at your properties. So if you have a look outside your properties and see where they look a little bit average, if you spend 5 to 10 grand on the landscaping on your property, you can add a lot of value. And why not talk to some local valuers and talk to your other property investor friends, and I bet you'll find that landscaping makes a big difference. So a lot of property investor chat is on you make your money on your way in, and for the mum and dad properties, the normal family homes, it generally seems to be to hold true. So when you buy, you got to buy well, and at least buy at a fair value. So over the last 5 years in Auckland especially, we've seen values just get to stupid levels. So it's not good for property investors buying in Auckland when it's a really hot market. But what I can tell you is, I bought my property late 2017 in a very in Half Moon Bay. So and I got a very fair price, And 6 months, 12 months prior to that, the prices were just ridiculous. My neighbor, the house is a little bit better, but 500k more on that house a year before I bought my house. And it's just because the market was so hot. So time in the market is important, but the most important thing is not overpaying for your property investments. So a couple of things, and I'll link to it in the bio below, is take a look at the Property 101 book that GRA put out. Matthew Gilligan has been doing the property investing side of things for 20 years, and he's got what he calls the 13 Ds. So when you're looking for property investments, there's a couple of things that you might want to keep an eye on. So I've pulled a few out. Deceased estates. So when people die, the kids or grandkids inherit the property and they don't want the property. So they immediately put it on the market with a date that the property has to sell. This is a perfect opportunity for a property investor, especially local, that knows the area and they see that the property has to sell. Is a very good way to pick up a property at least a fair value. And ideally, if you're buying a property that somebody that's a bit older has been living in for a long time, there's probably going to be potential for landscaping and potential for renovations. The subdivision potential is probably unrecognized by the people that are selling their property. Either they don't have the money or the expertise. So there's a lot of property right now that's selling at or below value that has so much room for improvement on that property and future development, future cash flow. It really is actually quite easy to find deals at the moment. And again, this ties into, dumb people that don't understand that they're selling 1,000 square meter bit of land that can fit 10 properties like I drew before, and they're selling it as if it can only fit 1 or 2 properties. So there's plenty of subdivisible properties that are selling for $1 million or less than $1 million right now. They're going to get cut up into 10 terrace property sections. So, you just got to know who to talk to and what to look out for. There are definitely more mortgagee sales happening at the moment, especially in the regions. And banks don't want to hold on to property. They want to get rid of it. So it's about setting up your pipeline on realestate.co.nz or TradeMe.co.nz or talking to local real estate agents and just making sure that when properties come on the market that fit your specific criteria, you've got to be the first one to know. The mortgagee sales, I've seen them before. They're often empty, they're often in bad condition, and again, bank doesn't want to be a property owner. So there's room for landscaping potential, renovation potential, and you can get plans drawn up and go back to the bank and use the equity and the future value to help you get the extra money to do those renovations. Divorce is one that I'm seeing a lot of lately. So people splitting up, they've got to split their assets, and usually they just want to get it done. Again, you want to be talking to real estate agents that are in the know, and quite often the divorce properties are the ones that have the price on them because they've just got a price expectation. They want to get a deal done quickly, and people have to take their money and run. DIY, so people that are selling property privately themselves are usually the type. Quite often they're trying to save 30, 40, 50 grand. So you can go in there, maybe they're trying to sell the property for $1 million, might be able to pick it up for 950, 960, and again, if you combine that with the other factors, it is a good way to get instant equity when you buy a property. And developers. So we're starting to see quite a few developers struggling for second and third stage finance at the moment. So if you are a handy person that knows what they're doing, there are actually properties for sale that they're not finished yet, or there is resource consent granted, or there are plans drawn up, or you might be able to buy a property that's already been subdivided. So you buy the land and the existing property, and then you can build on it and you can capitalize on the end result. So look, only a couple of minutes to chat about it. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of ways to create and build equity in this property market we're in. What the important thing is to talk with somebody that's not biased by emotion and that has looked at hundreds, if not thousands, of case studies like we have, and to get an insight into options. So just workshopping stuff on the phone and saying, hey, this is this property they have and this property they have, and I'm looking at that property, what do you think? And just being able to chat with people that know property and, you know, join the Property Investors Association and talk to other property investors. There are so many ways to create equity, and it's just a mindset. You really got to say, hey, I want to build 100K equity this year, and then reverse engineer back from that. It's that simple.